Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who's been traveling the world looking for old Jeeps and new buddies.
Tim Longo. Yeah, why do those Jeeps always break down? What the hell?
Mm-hmm.
I have to talk about that with somebody.
Yeah, there's always throwing a wrench into things.
Oh, nice. Yes, you hear that snicker in the back. We're very fortunate and gracious that we have a guest here to talk about Far Cry 2. We just finished our series as of last episode. I think we were five episodes for that. And we have an interview today, which is very exciting, with Clint Hocking. So I'm gonna give him a bit of an intro here, and then we'll get to it. So all right. So Clint is an award-winning game designer, director, and writer, and who knows what else. He started at Ubisoft after his MFA, working on games like Splinter Cell and Splinter Cell Chaos Theory, helping to create that franchise, winning awards for them, and making a huge impact on the genre of stealth games from then on. He and his team's approach to a more systemic gameplay and AI push things forward for all of us, even within a linear military game with a compelling story. He then went to work on Far Cry 2, and he helped revolutionize how open-world action games are built and what a more simulated and dynamic world really means. Along with Assassin's Creed, they helped usher in the Ubisoft open-world formula that we play today. From there, Clint has worked at such prestigious studios as LucasArts, Valve, Amazon, and he has since returned to Ubisoft, where he directed Watch Dogs Legion most recently, and has now come full circle back to Montreal, and is apparently working on the Assassin's Creed series, which is on the wiki and on his website, so I can talk about it. And so check that out. Beyond that, though, I do want to mention Clint has created many critically acclaimed video games along with his teams, but also he has shared his deep understanding of game design with the world as well, writing regular columns for Edge magazine, writing many columns in other places, papers, and his own blog. Definitely check that out. And being heavily involved with the Game Developers Conference Advisory Committee as well. He has even given us the term ludonarrative dissonance, which we use on this podcast often, and probably something he regrets to this day. As I said, it's hard to sum it up, which I did not say, but I'm saying it now. Hard to sum it up, but super happy to have you here, Clint. Welcome to the podcast, sir.
It's my pleasure to be here, Tim, Brett. Thanks very much. I'd really like to meet this Clint guy. He sounds really, really impressive. So thanks for making me sound cool. Appreciate it.
Well, yes, you are, sir, and we really appreciate having you here. One of the ways that we like to start our listeners kind of just, they like to know how people get into the biz and all of that stuff, right? So for our particular, I guess I would say, bent to that is, from a developer's perspective, what drove you to the industry? What inspired you to get into games? Was it happenstance? Was it intentional? And so what were those early days of Clint kind of joining up with this crazy thing that we all do?
So, yeah, I mean, in many ways, it was kind of happenstance. I was living in Vancouver. I was 28, 29 years old. I was doing my master's degree in creative writing. I was working on independent films. I was doing, mostly contract writing in the web industry at the time. I was also I was also fiddling around with Unreal Ed back in the day, making levels to play with my friends in Unreal Tournament. And then I also got involved making a level for a mod, for the Strike Force mod for Unreal Tournament back in, this would have been 98, 99 or something like that. And and that mod shipped a version 1.4, if I remember. It's like 25 years ago now, but I think it was version 1.4 when my level shipped with the mod. It was called London Calling. So the Strike Force mod was this sort of Counter-Strike like realistic commando PvP simulation in Unreal. And but it was just something I made for fun and for kicks, and because I thought it was really interesting, and making levels was always something that was fun and entertaining for me in my spare time. And then one day a friend of mine sent me the guy who was actually mostly playtesting my level with me. He sent me a link to a post on some game forum or website or something like that. It was like, and said like, hey, you want a job in Montreal? And it was a link for a job posting for a job at Ubisoft in Montreal, requiring Unreal experience to do level design. And I kind of sent in a resume like on a whim, like didn't even really think it was a real thing, right? I mean, it was a real thing, but like working as a game developer didn't even sound like a job, right? So I sent the email in, and they called me back and flew me to Montreal for an interview. And as it happened, I had a friend who'd been in my band, and a good friend of mine and roommate for many years, who'd moved to Montreal a couple of years before. And I was like, they're going to fly me to Montreal. It's like a free trip to Montreal in the summer to like hang out with my friend and not get a job. Sounds awesome. So I hopped on a plane and went and interviewed, and they made me an offer, and it was a terrible offer, but I took it anyways. And yeah, that's how it started, I guess. Really, really weird start.
All the offers were pretty terrible back then.
Yeah, well,
mine was abysmal.
I think I took a 75% pay cut to leave from being like doing contract writing in the web industry to start in the game industry. So what can you do?
Wow. Okay, that's quite a percentage. Yes.
Yeah, that's yeah. I mean, I was a step up because I was in grad school. So
I was in grad school too,
going to industry. But yeah.
It was anyway, those were the early days.
Yeah. And I mean, that story isn't unlike a lot of the folks we've had on because of that era. We talk a lot about sort of the trailblazing days, right? Where we didn't really know, especially in level design. We've talked about this multiple times, where level design wasn't really an clearly understood discipline anyway, So like, what is an offer for a level designer? What is a level designer? Yep. Where do you find them? Et cetera, et cetera. And so, yeah, the mod community was a big yep. place to get them from at the time. Same for LucasArts. Yeah. So, yeah. So was that job for Splinter Cell, I assume then?
Yeah. That job was for Splinter Cell.
Right on to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the game wasn't announced. Like it was, it had only recently been, signed on to be, what it would become, Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell. Right. And, I say many times, like, probably 2,000 people got their first job, or 5,000 people got their first job in the game industry that year. And like, not very many of them happened to start as a level designer working on Splinter Cell. Right. Like I was very, very, very lucky to just get thrown that pitch and just be in the right spot. Right. It was miraculous, probably 50% of the people who started their job in the game industry that year shipped a game you've never heard of, or maybe never, or probably never even shipped. So yeah, it was just good luck, just luck.
Yeah. And then, so what, I mean, obviously we'll get to Far Cry 2, but I think we're interested a little bit to know, because your impact on Splinter Cell was so, and the teams, of course, it was a team effort, we know, was so felt. Because you ended up doing writing for that game, and other things beyond level design. Yeah. So can you give us a little bit of that sort of migration and sort of evolution?
It was complicated. I think a lot of the team on Splinter Cell had been from the Ubisoft New York studio and had moved up to Montreal to sort of consolidate workforce and stuff like that. And it was, to be frank, it was a very difficult production, very difficult development, very stressful. And a lot of people challenged to kind of integrate and all of that kind of stuff, moving to different cities and different countries and all of that. So I think, it's been a long time, so I hope I don't get it wrong. I think at Alpha, the lead game designer left, and because I'd been driving so much on the level design side and pushing for kind of some very specific designs for things through the kind of bottom up, right? Like, I built this way to use a keypad. I think we need to support it. Here's a design for it. And like, then it would end up becoming part of the game. So they said, do you want to take over as the lead game designer? So I was like, okay, sure. And then at beta, the lead writer left, and they said, well, you're an Anglophone for one. You almost have a master's degree in creative writing, and you've been working quite closely on the script for your levels. Do you want to take over that as well? And the script was written at that point, and I was like, yeah, that sounds really easy, so I can take it over and walk it over the finish line. Of course, turns out at beta, like, then you have to rewrite everything for all the cuts you make and all the changes you make, and as you realize what the game actually is, and you have to fix everything. So it ended up being a lot more work than I thought. But I mean, it was still, I'm not trying to take more credit than is due. I mean, the story was still written, and it's still more or less the story we shipped. And so, yeah, I ended up shipping that game as a level designer and a game designer and a script writer. And yeah, I guess kind of having from a guy who'd never shipped a game in his life before, a pretty big impact.
Yeah. It does. And you've talked about some of the challenges of some of those really, heavy development cycles before. And I think you're alluding to that here, and promotions, field promotions, we would call them, or what have you, along the way. Yeah. It was, to be honest, part of my journey as well, through design. So totally understand that, and it's a hard process to go through, and especially I think I applaud you for being humble, and I think respectful of everyone going through that. Not just your own journey, because it is, people come and go for different reasons, and it's challenging, and we like to reinforce that on the podcast so the audience knows and remembers how hard it is to make video games, even though yes, they are just video games.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that really set you up then to sort of take over as a creative director, right? I mean, you're doing, narrative design, level design, and as you mentioned, bottom up kind of like elements, sort of systems design, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it was
to really put in place.
It was so. I mean, after that, I'm sure that's going to be your next question, but yeah, it was. I rolled on to Chaos Theory, and the whole. The leadership of the Splinter Cell team all resigned and left. So that, like, the art director, the lead producer, the lead level designer, a couple of technical directors, the lead programmer, the lead animator, if I recall, maybe not the lead animator. Anyway, like 5 or 6 of them all just left, which was, super weird, but it left this huge vacuum and this need to kind of rebuild the team. And they asked me to be the lead level designer and the lead writer, and they brought someone else in to be the lead game designer. And then maybe 6 months, maybe less into Chaos Theory, they decided that they needed a creative director, and they asked me to do that, which was sort of, in many ways, effectively what I was kind of already doing. At first I said I didn't want it because I was afraid that they would kind of try to stick me in an office somewhere and make me the Lord of the Manor or something. And I was, up until that point I was writing, I wrote every word of the script in Chaos Theory, right? Including all the barks and all the cinematics, like every single word. So I was like, I don't want you to pull me off of this and like bring in a writer and a lead level designer to replace me. And they're like, no, that's not what we mean. We want you to also be the creative director. I was like,
we give you another job.
Yeah. So, but anyways, I mean, it was more or less what I was doing anyways, plus the writing of the script and the sort of running the creative side of the level design team. So eventually I said yes to that. And that's how Chaos Theory kind of took off from there. So, that was another tough development for sure.
Yeah. So with Splinter Cell being kind of a foundational start there, and as we can kind of get into Far Cry 2, were there do you have any memories of goals that you had from a, I guess I'll say, design perspective, but it really could come from anywhere, narrative as well, that you brought with you from your learnings, both, pros and cons, I guess, from the two Splinter Cell games as you were, we'll get to sort of the transition or like how you got to Far Cry 2 in a second, but were there any kind of fundamentals that you were starting to learn in the game design realm with the two Splinter Cell games that were really sticking with you?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely, for sure. From my perspective, there's a very clear lineage. It's maybe not obvious from the player's perspective, but I mean, the original Splinter Cell is very constrained, very punishing. There's lots of interesting tools and interesting systems, but the game is structured in such a way that you're forced to use them, or else you fail. You get a game over if you manage to find a way through the door behind the guard without using your thermal vision to read the fingerprints off of the keypad. Like if you find another way through, you get a game over. And because it was explicitly authored that you have to use your thermal goggles to read the warm fingerprints on the keypad to get through the door, right? Which is awful. It's bad game design. Sorry, I don't even want to say it's bad game design. I don't even want to be critical of the how it got in there. It's bad player motivation, right? You should be teaching the player to have the agency to complete goals with the tools that they have, not requiring them to jump through your arbitrary and invisible hoops, right? And so on Chaos Theory, our goal was to fix all of that, right? To have richer systems and more player tools, but also to kind of encourage and reward the player for exploring the space and engaging with the game their way. And then the challenge, of course, was like, how do you have a compelling narrative in that much more an open environment? And so that was the kind of goal we set ourselves, was like, how do we structure this game world, these levels, I guess, so that you can still engage with this rich narrative, this rich structured narrative with a very strong through line and very strong, extrinsic goals and motivations that feel, the stakes of this global covert conflict thing, while also having the player freedom to kind of go about these levels and deconstruct them in all kinds of complicated ways and use the tools the way you want. And so it was, that was our goal. And I think, we had a bunch of while there was sort of a vacuum at the top level of the team, we had quite a few of the original level designers and artists and animators and people who kind of understood, at the bottom up, how to make this game. So it was really just like, putting our innovation chips on the table, and make it sound easy, putting our innovation chips on the table in the right places, and fixing the things that we needed to fix, and really just trying to build, and sort of like from the very beginning, it was like, how do you make the perfect version of the first game, right? And I think that's really what we set out to do. And I think we did a pretty good job of it.
Yeah, for sure. Chaos Theory, high watermark, and we often, to your point about, that's a interesting way to put it, a perfect version of the first game. On the podcast, we've often, when we go back to play a franchise or a game and talk about, what its impact has been, we often play the second one in a series for that very reason. Right. Probably, right? Is that's often, the first one gets some of the template going and some of the understanding of we do have something here. And then, oftentimes the second or third one get to really capitalize on that, if you get to the second or third one, which isn't obviously always the case.
Yeah. Yeah, often you don't really know what the game is until you're kind of licking the envelope and mailing it out to the world. It's like, oh well.
Yep, that's this is what we were doing all this time. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, your tools aren't there.
Mail this back in time.
Yeah, totally. What were you gonna say, Brett?
Yeah, I said your tools aren't there yet. Like, you're just you don't even know what the game is until the last 6 months, on the first game in a series often. And then you're cramming it in as fast as you can, because now you actually know what you're building. Yeah. And of course that period is shorter or longer depending on where in game development history you are. So somebody asked us about Mega Man, why'd you play 2 instead of 1? We're like, well, Mega Man 1 they probably made in a month, even though it was 9 months or whatever, because that's what was left once I figured out what the game was, and 2 was the better version. or at least people seem to think so. So, yeah, that second Splinter Cell I know is one that very much holds up.
Third Splinter Cell technically, but second one that we made in Montreal.
Yeah, right.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't aware of one not made in Montreal.
So Chaos Theory's done, and Far Cry 2 comes up. Far Cry, as we talked about on the podcast, Ubisoft, I believe, acquires the Far Cry license or the Far Cry franchise IP. Somewhere in that transition.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know Crytek goes on and makes Crysis, etc. So, what were you looking for? Something new? What was that transition like to Far Cry? Which is such a big jump, big change.
I mean, it was exactly that. It was, like I said, we were trying to make the perfect version of the first one, and I kind of felt, even as the game was closing and even before it shipped, but certainly after it shipped, and we started to see the review scores and the acclaim that was coming, it kind of felt like I'd kind of felt like the high school basketball player who chucked the ball from the baseline and got the 3-pointer to win the game. Like it wasn't going to beat it, right? And I just said, I don't want to make another one of these. Like, I don't know where I would even begin to think about how to make another Splinter Cell game. So I, went and talked to some of my bosses and managers, and I said, what else is there? And that's when they said, we've got, because at that time I think they were working on the Far Cry console, couple of the Far Cry console games. Mm-hmm. They're like, we've acquired this brand now, so it's not just a publishing agreement or a licensing thing, and we want to see if we can, elevate this brand into one of our kind of, our tent poles, along with, Assassins and Splinter and whatever, and Prince of Persia and, the other stuff that we were making at the time. And they asked me if I wanted to do that, and I thought, yeah, it sounds great. Like I'd really enjoyed, first person shooters growing up from Doom and Wolf all the way through to, like I said, working on Strike Force for Unreal Tournament. And it sounded like a cool opportunity. So I jumped aboard and yeah, and then that was it. It was make the next Far Cry game. That was the easy mandate from the beginning. Got more complicated from there.
Yeah, so that's where I think the rub is for this, because the difference between Far Cry 1 and the iterations of Far Cry 1, I guess I'll say, because they had some of those sort of like semi-sequels or what have you, to Far Cry 2 being such a huge leap. Like, that's probably, I mean, for my money, that's where the meat is, for this conversation of like, how do you go from that to this? Like, what were the pillars that you were working with? How did you look at Far Cry 1 and say, okay, or you and the team, okay, this is where we should go, right?
Yep.
How much of that was Ubisoft, because it seemed like they were moving into open world with Assassins, with the big initiative or something. But yeah, how do you get from there to there? Like, it's insane.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few main parts, right? Like, one of the main things was they sort of just acquired this brand. Like now we owned it, as opposed to we're licensing it or in a publishing agreement with Crytek or whatever it was. And so they're like, well, now that we have this, we should see what we can do with it. So it wasn't like, try to make derivative sequels, right? It was, how do we kind of do something new and interesting and sort of reacquire, right? How do we get into a reacquisition kind of mode? Get people excited about what we're doing with this. I think the other part was, me personally, in the sort of small team of half a dozen people that I started with, we went and played the original Far Cry and played all of the stuff that we were working on internally or had shipped internally. I don't remember exactly what the timing was, whether the Far Cry Instincts or whatever was out yet. I don't remember the details, but whether it had been released or not, we played it, and we played the other things that were being worked on. And, I think between us, between the half a dozen of us in the very early days, we realized, there's something special here, which is this ability to kind of approach these compounds and like get into fights in these sort of very, kind of noisy environments that are hard to they're not set up and authored the way first person shooters at the time were set up and authored, in sort of corridors and kind of planned level design encounters, the way Splinter Cell was authored, right? It was very much more freeform. And although even in the original Far Cry, it wasn't completely open. They were still trying to author the experience at all the choke points they would put between their levels. And we said, why don't we? What would it be like if this game was really an open world, and how would that feel? And what if the player could literally come at any of these sort of major location encounters with objectives that are central to the place, rescue someone or blow something up or steal something, whatever. But they really have their own tools and their own capabilities and their own way to approach that problem. And we kind of build the game to make that kind of become more interesting as you do it, right? And that's the path we embarked on. And at first there were tech challenges. I think it was about a 3-year development. So the first year was really, we were stuck in the mud for a long time. We had I shouldn't say that. We had lots of prototypes and stuff like that, but we were having a hard time kind of getting the engine and the tech and the open world streaming and all of that kind of stuff off the ground. So we had, like a 1 square kilometer demo that was a load of kind of like a level load, like from Far Cry 1, and with a couple of locations in it, and you could go back and forth between them, and and kind of missions and objectives and stuff that could be turned on and off in there, and it felt pretty good. Limited tool set, very limited player capabilities. I think we had one really crappy vehicle that didn't work very well or feel like we wanted vehicles to feel. I don't think we had fire propagation. We certainly didn't have any animals, anything like that. So, I mean, it was very early days, but I think we were already starting to feel that there's something fresh here, right? There's this ability to choose where you want to go and sort of plan your attack with the tools that you have was starting to show a lot of promise. And, you have to understand there was no such thing as, at this point, there was no such thing as an open world first person shooter, right? They didn't exist. Right. And so there was this big risk of taking an open world game. At the time, the benchmarks were GTA. I think Assassin's Creed had shipped right around, when we were kind of in our first year or whatever. GTA, Assassin's Creed. There were a few other open world games. I guess Morrowind was probably out at that time and stuff like that.
Morrowind was. Yep. Oblivion might have been.
Maybe. But I think most open world games were RPGs, right? And first person shooters were, and especially we were moving into the time of like Medal of Honor or Call of Duty, right? We were moving into this time of very authored, like very heavily constrained, very scripted, single player, first person shooter mission design for set pieces, right? And so this approach we were taking was like completely off the map. But we were playing the game and it was fun. So that's just the way we kept going, I think.
Yeah, that must have been pretty exciting. I know that it's like those early days when you've made some prototypes and you light on something, you're like, wow, this is new and different. Can you talk a little bit about the sort of team excitement and like how you channel that?
Yeah, it's weird. I think I don't think it was surprising. Like, I think it just kind of, again, like to be clear, the Medals of Honors and Calls of Duties didn't exist either, or they were only just starting to exist, right? So a more adequate comparison for us was like Battlefield 1942, right? Like it was like this open world where you can go anywhere you want and get into fights. Of course, you're fighting other players in that game, but it wasn't like this game was. It wasn't like this unimagined territory. It was like just another option, right? And it just seemed, I don't know, it just seemed like the space was so fertile that like you could just kind of go anywhere and anything would work if you just, worked on it a bit. And I mean, obviously that's not true, but right. Like you're asking if it was surprising or felt exciting. And it just felt like, no, like, of course there's a game here. Like it just makes sense. And as we kept working on it, it just kept getting more interesting.
Yeah, you made a point about the transition of FPSs and Far Cry 2's place in that sort of timeline, and to bring it to a topic that we and essentially linear corridors, or in some cases hub and spoke, or basically variations on that. Half-Life maybe being something that that sort of pushed in certain other directions related to that, but one of the topics we talked a lot about on the series was how the game introduces friction to your essentially point A to point B, point to point sort of experience. And so, like you said, the special sauce was I can approach this from any direction. And that's a cool concept. And we can do a lot with that, very systemic. And I can, like you said, I can see how you all just sort of like, it's just a steamroller. We're just like, things keep coming. You're like, oh, and then we can do this, we can do this. But of course, when there's no corridor and there's no enemies in that corridor or what have you, I assume you need to create some sort of friction to push people through the gameplay and to have problems occur that create firefights along the way. And I was pretty critical on the series about how heavy the friction was, but I get it. And I think Brett also made some great points about the importance of it. And there's probably a the fine tuning of that is very, very tricky. But did you all talk about that friction and how intentional was it? I assume it was, or when you don't have a corridor to push somebody through, what do you do to kind of guide them to through the gameplay?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, first of all, like kind of as a aside to this conversation, I personally feel like the way to enjoy playing this game, which can be difficult to enjoy for a lot of people, the way to enjoy playing this game is to play it on a level of difficulty, to set the level of difficulty a little bit higher than what you're comfortable with, not a little bit lower, as is sort of probably the approach that a lot of people take nowadays. And I think the reason is because and we got our fair share of criticism for this, and it's a certain kind of criticism, and it's fair that people feel that way. But I think a lot of people expected the game, now that it was an open world, to be more like an RPG, more like Oblivion or whatever. That's right. Yeah, I mean, Oblivion must have been out because we shipped the same week as Fallout. And we shipped the same week as Fable. All the games that started with FA shipped in the same week of 2008. Super bizarre. But I think people expected, it's an open world. I'm going to go to this town, or I'm going to go to this place, and there's going to be quest givers, and I'm going to talk to people, and I'm going to sell my stuff that I loot and all of this stuff. But this is not what the game is. The game is a first-person shooter, full stop. It's not different from Doom, in the sense that you have some weapons and you have to get to the end, right? It's just that it takes place in this open world space that gives you freedom to go. So yes, the freedom, the friction that you're talking about is in there to provide the continual survival and competitive pressure that drives you, right? Because without it, if it becomes a game where you're collecting and shopping and doing all of these other, and talking to people and being invited into a cave or a ruin to explore, to find some loot and find some treasure, there's a whole universe of other systems that need to get built that detract from the things we were trying to do, which was just make an amazing shooter. So we did have to build this world that's kind of hostile no matter which way you go, and that with the resource constraints that you have on ammunition and on weapon degradation and on your health resources and all of these kinds of things, like kind of, I don't want to say force, but kind of pressure you to move towards your objective, so that you don't just run out of gas, like run out of bullets, run out of health, run out of resources, and get killed. So So that was, and again, like when I say it's not unlike Doom, it's the same thing, right? Like if you're too careful in Doom and you're not moving quickly enough to maintain the upkeep of picking up the ammo and the health, and you're playing cover shooters, circle strafing around enemies, or like slicing the pie around corners and taking hits, you're not going to make it, right? You have to keep this pace. I'm talking about old school Doom, but I think it actually ironically applies to new school Doom as well. You have to keep this forward momentum, or else you fall behind a certain like survival curve, and you're fucked. You're gonna have to restart. And I think that was core to our philosophy at the time. It's a world that's trying to kill you, and you have a mission to do, and you can approach it your way and think about it the way you want. But if you think about it too much, or if you try to game it too hard, you're just going to run out of gas and fail.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking as you describe that of watching like John Romero play Doom, and like thinking about how I play Doom and being like, that guy really knows how to play Doom. Like, and so, but it's that constant forward pressure that you talk about of like, oh, I'm going to move ahead. I'm going to kill this guy because he's going to drop a thing, or there's going to be ammo behind him or health or whatever, and that's pulling you through. And that is definitely an interesting perspective. I'm sure I would enjoy watching you play some Far Cry 2.
I mean, I don't want to. I love playing Far Cry 2. I haven't played it in maybe since shortly after I moved to Toronto. I think I played it again, but I haven't played it now probably in 5 years. It's probably the longest I've gone without playing it. I really love the game. I still do. I don't think very many developers say that about the games that they've made, because shipping them is often, makes you, I don't want to say hate them, but makes you not want to think about them too much more.
Well, we see them differently, right?
For sure.
mean, we see the whole process of getting there, and it's also just you see the things that you didn't get to do,
yes,
or you see the bugs or whatever. You just see things that players are probably way more forgiving of, honestly.
Yeah, for sure.
And.
But for me, so I've said this before publicly. It was in a magazine or something, but one time, and maybe I'm jumping way far ahead here, but one time when we were showing, I think our what we call our FP, one of our big internal milestones, maybe it was our alpha, I don't remember. We were in Paris meeting with editorial, and we showed the game to the chief creative officer, and he was playing the game, and he stopped after after an hour or so, and after having just blown up some place and completed some objective, and he put the controller down, and he said, look, he said, and this is as close as I'm going to get to a quote, he said, when I'm playing this game, I look at the enemy in the camp down below me, and I make a little movie in my head of what I'm going to do when I rush in there and fight them, and how I'm going to complete my objective. And then I start to go down in there, and everything gets completely fucked up. And the movie that I get from playing the game is better than the movie that I had in my head. And he said, that is what makes this game special, and make the whole game about that. And I was like, holy fuck, I was blown away, because I was like, you're exactly right. Because that's exactly what I feel when the game is going well. It's like the emergent, the emergent chaos, if you want, that you're kind of, it's not chaos in like a degenerate way. It's emergent chaos in this kind of like surfing way, right? Of like, I'm surfing this wave of carnage and destruction, and improvising as it's kind of threatening to crash over top of me. And it feels really, really, really good. And the thing is, it often feels good. A lot of games have that kind of feeling, and it's like this once in a blue moon, man, that was spectacular. But this game, and I feel like I'm bragging or something, but this game really is built out of that. And not even so intentionally, like we identified it late and we tried to push it in that direction, but it was more just an emergent property of the kind of simulation we were making that made it like that. And it's just often surprising and delightful. And, now, it's quite a matured feeling. It's called, Ubisoft internally calls it the anecdote factory, right? And that's really what it is. It's like this collision of you're in the middle of the blazing jungle, and the explosions are going off all around and the reinforcements arrive and a fucking tiger jumps out of the bushes and kills the dude that was just about to open up on you with his flamethrower at point blank range. And then he explodes and a flaming tiger runs around and lights everything on fire and kills everyone. It's insane. But it feels magical and special. And I think that was the thing that we got in for the first time, and the thing that I still enjoy playing to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point about playing on a bit harder difficulty. I wonder, I mean, because I, had played it back in, I guess, 2009, I think I said on the cast. And so I have a lot of Far Cry 2 in me, and have since played some other Far Cries. And maybe I should have bumped it up. I almost never do that anymore because I just, my hands are old. But you're right. It's like trying to keep up with the jazz beat if it's that fast.
Yeah.
It's like, somebody's going a little bit, you're playing concert speed rather than sort of practice speed, because you're all amped up. And so that's interesting.
If you don't feel that the wave can crash over you, I don't think it's a very interesting game. And but of course, and yes, one of the difficult frictions is because of and I assume you guys were playing on PC because,
I played on the PS3.
Okay. But the point is, on the console, you have to make it to these safe houses to save the game. On PC, you can save anywhere. Maybe there's a setting in the PC where you can to turn that off or whatever. I don't remember. But if you're playing on PC, automatically a lot of that pressure goes away. And I remember having those conversations when we were developing the game and saying, look, I think we need to require you to go to the safe houses on PC. But it was just untenable for a PC audience. So in that sense, I think that in the specific way that I'm talking about, in this feeling of having that wave of pressure constantly building that drives you forward and puts pressures you into this kind of magical space, I think the console versions are more interesting because of that. Of course, I mean, if you choose to play the PC version that way, then you can have that experience, which is sort of the point, I guess, of the PC argument, which is fine. But I think really having that sort of lurking feeling of dread and destruction, following you through the encounters, is really key.
It's like a dash of survival horror in that way, right?
You've
got to get the typewriter ribbons and go to the right room and all of that in the Resident Evil house.
Yeah, I literally was going to use survival horror as an example because there's a kind of a big debate in this I don't know, survival horror community, if you will, about that problem, especially with where Resident Evil's gone and Dead Rising's save system, right, being highly controversial, but I enjoyed it much more, even though it was as committed as. And I actually asked the question to your point, Clint, on the podcast because I was playing on PC, and it didn't dawn on me right away that the save system was different. And I asked Brett, what are these safe things in the safe houses? I never use those. I just save. And he's like, what are you talking about? Yeah. So, there's your wave analogy is amazing. The surfing analogy. And I feel like you're asking, I think appropriately so, asking the player to commit to the game in a way. Yeah. It's like you commit to what this is and embrace it. And I don't think I did. I think I had trouble committing to it. And I think that's a new filter that I would want to bring to the game if I were to go back to it, for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of the game is built on those ideas, right? I think, the idea of the critically wounded animations when you have to reset your broken bones and pull shrapnel out of your body. The idea of the buddy rescues when you got to they help you up off the ground and now they're kind of in play and they can live or die and you got to give them, your medicine to keep them alive and all of this stuff. This stuff was all designed to be built upon the sort of psychological and emotional and adrenaline pressure of being in those situations and failing, right? I don't think that stuff works as well if you can just quick load, right? I feel like all of those things, that
nothing's at stake.
Being hit by that grenade going off and realizing that you're critically wounded, the screen's flashing, and pressing the button, and then your hand comes up and there's a nail between your fingers, and you kind of pull this bloody nail out of your hand. Like it's this visual, it's a jump scare. It's like horror, shock, body horror, right? But it's there to hit you when you're at this adrenaline peak, right? When your heart is pumping in your ears and you're disoriented and afraid and you're facing this kind of adrenaline crash of like a reload. And then you get this really impactful animation that kind of shocks you and makes you turn your head away from the screen and be like, oh my God, that was fucking disgusting, right? And then you have to get back into it. Like these things were engineered in a sense to create these really visceral, it's a word we use too much, but a visceral impact to really kind of attach you to the world and the character and everything around. So yeah, I mean, I think it's super important that to play the game on its own terms is to play it with those constraints, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it's also like, I mean, you're talking like normally those sorts of animations that you're describing that are really visceral are usually like the death states. You know, it's like you see that's Lara Croft is getting, you know, she's fallen onto spikes or she's gotten, you know, I don't know. There's a million really crazy ones in the reboot series that Tim worked on. You know, those are sort of these punctuation marks, but they're the end of a sentence in those. And in your game, they're a comma or a semicolon.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, here's a moment where you can't shoot. So there's like some friction there as well. But then you're right back into the rest of the sentence or the musical phrase or what have you. It's kind of a rest as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, I think that maybe is a bit of a segue to another topic that we need to hit. There's two, this has been a great conversation so far, Clint. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We're probably going to run out of time to hit everything because one that we definitely won't get time to is, which you may or may not even want to talk about, but sort of where Far Cry has gone since, because we played as a bonus episode some of the modern stuff and compared them. But you know, I know that gets into tricky territory. But the two for Far Cry 2, one is the diegetic nature of the game, and then two is the setting and the story, and the situation. So, but as a segue to your point about the injuries, the critical injuries and the diegetic nature, the map. You know, driving, whatever. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's another, in my opinion, form of commitment, right? For the developers of like, hey, we're going all the way. Your gun's going to jam. You know, you have crosshairs, etc.
Yeah, I mean, all of these things to me, they're all one thing, right? They're all working together towards this goal of creating, I called it at the time, and it's maybe not the right word. Diegetic is a word. Psychosomatic was the word I used a lot at the time, like this psychological, physical bond with your avatar, right? We never leave the eyes of the avatar for cutscenes or anything like that. You know, that's classic Half-Life 2, going back many, many years, but it wasn't just like we should do it like Half-Life 2 because Half-Life 2 is cool. We were doing it specifically because, you know, we wanted you to have these feelings. In fact, you know, in many games where the camera never leaves the avatar's, you know, eyes, if you look down, you can see your feet. In our game, you can't see your feet, right? Because unless you have one of these moments and you need to pull shrapnel out of it. We got some criticism for that, but the point was when you look down and see your feet and they look dumb and they're shuffling around and not connected to the world, it breaks the thing that we're explicitly trying to create, which is when you see your body or when you interact with a door or a physical object, pick up ammunition or a gun or when one of your buddies is carrying you behind cover or when you're, you know, taking medicine, a Surette, like we really want to make it feel, or even changing position in a vehicle, right? Like sliding up to get on the mounted gun or sliding back into the driver's seat, all of these things.
Even sprinting was also like a commitment.
Taking out the map, all of this stuff, we really wanted it to feel really, really physical so that when we hit you with a weapon malfunction or when we hit you with an injury or when a buddy comes and picks you up off the ground, these things feel more credible and less, you know, less gamey, but less contrived, right? And then again, all of that was kind of the tip of this pyramid, if you want, was the moment when your buddies are lying on the ground and you have to go over to them and give them medicine, right? And so there's a few different ways it plays out. Sometimes it plays out, you give them medicine, they get back up. Sometimes it plays out, you give them medicine and you have to give them more and they get back up, or you have to give them more and you're out. At which point you just got to leave them there to die, right? or sometimes you give them medicine and they keep asking for more, and then you kind of euthanize them with the medicine. And again, or you can take out your weapon and you can finish them off. So all of this was there to create this bond, right? All of it is there for that moment that maybe only happens to you 2 or 3 times in the whole game, when you're there with your wounded buddy in the dirt and you're trying to save their life. And it can go either way. And we really wanted that to be like super, super meaningful. We wanted that to be like the thing that players talked about, when they're playing oh my God, did you know that your buddies, this can happen? Like, it's incredible, right? So yeah, that was all of those pieces were there to kind of point at that. And, that was the goal.
I mean, it also reminds you that, your positions could be reversed, right? In a way. I mean, they can't because it's a video game, et cetera, blah. Yeah. But like at the same time, it's, he's just another one of the possible characters in many cases that I could have chosen at the beginning of the game. Yep. It's not always the case, but that's often the case. Yep. So you also have that, where, so it like even puts you more, we say immersion, right? But this is why we say immersion. Yeah. It does that in that same way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was the intent, was to really try to leverage that physical, visceral connection with the environment and the place to connect you to this group of individuals who are there alongside you and in the same situation you're in. And then in the end of the game, obviously they turn against you and betray you. And again, that's supposed to be another kind of big payoff of this whole investment. So yeah.
Yeah, I think your description of the goals there it's good to hear it coming from the horse's mouth, because it is a game that feels like everything is very connected to a unified goal. And we might say unified direction or unified design or what have you, but it feels holistic in that way. And I think my memory at the time, and also to this day when people talk about the game, I think that is especially developers who who have dug deeply into why they do or do not like the game, but appreciate the game, is because that is so difficult, in my opinion, to get such a holistic, set of goals to all work together. So it's good to hear that coming from. Yeah, absolutely. And those stand out, right? There's, especially for us as developers, they stand out, but they stand out to the player. That players may not exactly always know why, but there's something, right? There's something. And this game in particular has, as you well know, a cult following in the player base, because it's unlike so many things, other things. And then the weirdness of where the franchise goes later. But so can you, in our remaining minutes, and we're out of time, we want to be respectful of your time, but can you give us any sort of thoughts on the setting? I mean, I think it would be irresponsible if we didn't hit it a little bit, because it's such another big choice that so setting, story, so sort of like where your thoughts were there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, back in that, that first 3-6 months when there was just a small number of people on the team, we had 25 different ideas for where the game could be set. We knew we didn't want to go back to a tropical island, because that's what the original game was, and that's what all of the console expansions or sequels or whatever ports or whatever they were. And so we're like, where do we go that's gonna be this sort of perpetually dangerous, hostile place, but would feel really exotic and beautiful. And there's this word in French, dépaise, but it sort of means displacing, I guess, or like sort of means something like that. And we had so many conversations about that, from the Arctic Circle to fucking Mars to everything, right? And it was the art director Alex Amancio who had suggested first Africa, and we kept kind of brushing it aside, like no, it doesn't work, without really giving it due consideration, until one day when we were still churning on this question, he came back with just a small, like probably 5 slides or something, PowerPoint presentation to kind of tell us why he thought it was the right choice. And, it was literally 4 or 5 slides with just a few key images of the kind of iconic imagery of the African savannah, and like a lion in the hiding in the grass or something, and suddenly it was like, oh yeah, shit, wait, I understand what you mean. And from there, it snowballed, and it was like, okay, there's all these different, Africa's not a country, it's a continent, right? It has all these amazing deserts and savannas and jungles and cities of all kinds of, from the North African, kind of cities to major metropolises to Central African kind of post-colonial and colonial kinds of cities. So it was just all of this richness, right? And also centuries of history going back to, ancient peoples who've been there for since there were peoples. And so like how could we kind of take this and bring it all together, and what does it mean? And then of course also starting to have the conversation about what does it mean to have a game that's set in sort of a pastiche. I don't mean to say that in a way that's critical, but kind of a way that tries to take all of Africa and put it into 50 square kilometers or something, which is a little bit problematic for sure. But how do we take that and make it a perpetually hostile world, and what does that mean, right? And that got us into reading very widely about conflicts in Sierra Leone and Rwanda, and watching all kinds of films. Like Black Hawk Down had come out a couple years before, and there was all kinds of references for us to read about and learn about, and try to understand the kinds of conflicts that have been happening in Africa for the last 100 years and 200 years and and before that, of course, but mostly looking at what the West has done with what the West did, or what the imperial world did with the colonization of Africa, and what the legacy of that is, and what Western more modern Western states have done with that, and trying to reconcile with how you make a game in that context. And I think I don't think I would make this game today, frankly. I think that the subject matter is, I think our awareness of the injustices and the complexities and the legacy of what's happened there. I think we just have a better awareness of it now, and I don't think I would be presumptuous enough to try to make this game as a 50-year-old, but as a whatever 35-year-old, maybe I was a little more optimistic or naive or something. That said, I think in the context and who we were and what we cared about, I think we made a pretty good effort at making a game that was kind of respectful of these places and these peoples and this history. We certainly got a lot of positive feedback from consultants and press and press and media in Africa and around the world. So I think we got our fair share of criticism as well, and that's all fair criticism. At the end of the day, we were, a bunch of mostly, affluent white males living in Montreal who were doing our best to try to represent these kinds of things. And take that for what it is. It was a lot, a lot of learning. It was difficult for sure. It was, to say nothing of the contradictions of the Splinter Cell games. This one was very heavy on the heart as we were working on some of these things, right? Stories of refugees and conflict diamonds and corporate exploitation and foreign mercenaries and all of the kinds of shit that can get wrapped up in these conflicts was a lot for us to think about and deal with and try to deal with respectively or respectfully. So it was a journey for sure. I'm glad we did it, but I'm glad we did it, and I'm glad I think did it as respectfully as could have been done for who we were in the time and place in which we did it. But again, I'm not sure I would go down that path again if I had the choice.
Yeah, it's tricky. I would say that it holds up better in that respect, and I think that you can see that care is there, but also that care rubs up against the exigencies of having to make a video game,
Sure.
right? So like you have that, that sort of central conflict, which makes that particularly thorny, right? Because of course you have the conflict, you have to have this conflict constantly. So it's definitely tricky. But I think others in the series, not to throw any shade, have held up way worse. Because I played a couple more, or some of a couple more, afterwards, and was like, ooh, wow.
I mean, it's very difficult.
I wouldn't have done that.
I think, I'm 50 now, and I don't want to say I'm less optimistic about the medium than I was when I was 30, 35 or whatever. But I mean, I think it's just harder now. It's just harder. Making games is really hard. It's always been really hard. But now there's so much more. There's so much more in the popular consciousness. People are so much more aware of them as a cultural form. And video games themselves as a medium have, like you said, I don't remember how you said it, the exigencies of the medium. Like there's just this built-in complexity in the form that's makes it in some ways challenging to make it about certain kinds of topics. Certain kinds of topics are difficult to approach with our medium, and I think I was more optimistic about our ability to do that well, and I think we took a fair shot at it. I think we made a good game that's worth looking at how it tackles these challenges. But now it's way harder. It's way harder.
Yeah. There's a built-in tension. I think that, I don't know if it's an age thing or if it is that, social media and how the internet has changed or what, because we're all about the same age and looking at life differently and kids, whatever it may be, that's giving us a different perspective. But I think we've talked about it before, that there's a tension with the medium whenever certain topics are presented, that you are supposed to win, you are supposed to achieve, you are supposed to level up. It's like, well, you put all those things into certain topics and it's like doesn't feel great. So it's maybe some revelations that we're having over time that we didn't quite see. But I mean, despite the perspective challenges with the game, the thing, the silver lining for me was that, at least on our podcast series, that when we were talking about this topic, there were at least things, there were questions and conversations that were coming up that that were sparked by the game that would not normally be sparked by other games. Right. So to your point, I mean, fair enough. Maybe you wouldn't choose this setting in this story today, but at the same time, and you appropriately, admitted to the perspectives that the team and you and the team had. But we talked about blood diamonds, on the podcast. We talked about the situation as far as also being white males, not, living in the US. Right. So pushing on that, and the game didn't shy away from at least trying, and there's a lot of companies out there today that, and teams that claim to be apolitical about things, and you can't be. I just fundamentally don't believe that that's possible. Right. And so at least again, another example of, I think, commitment, despite how it went.
Yeah. I mean, I think the team was uniformly committed to, like I said, trying to treat these complicated challenges respectfully. And, I'm definitely proud of what we accomplished. And part of me does realize, I mean, how to 20, 24-year-old kids in Iowa have these conversations, right? Like, it's just not a topic of conversation for the average, Western teenager, right? And a video game can bring these conversations to them. But, because it can do that, we have a responsibility to bring the right conversations and not the rah, let's go save those people from themselves conversations, right? It needs to be a lot more thought through than that. And yes, sometimes the medium makes that difficult, but I think it is an important part of what we do. And while maybe I wouldn't pick this fight again, I still try to do it in the games that I make. and still try to make accessible to our audience, who are, well, I mean, and not the audience of game players, because now they're all around the world in all kinds of social strata and all kinds of languages and religions and cultures. But I still make, blockbuster quadruple A console PC first video games, and so my audience is much narrower, much wealthier, much more much more identifiable, and so or targetable, I guess. So I do try to be aware of the fact that concepts that we may be making our games about can be introducing new ideas to, or opening up conversations in this audience that I think can be important. So it's worth thinking about. So maybe when I said I'm not as optimistic as I was before, maybe I still am. I don't know.
You talked yourself into it.
Yeah, I guess I am.
Yeah. Great. No, that's awesome. Well, yeah, again, want to be respectful of your time. It's been great. I did want to ask about Trespasser, which we compared notes about long ago, but that'll have to be another time, everybody.
Have you guys played Trespasser yet?
No, I threatened to Brett that we should.
Clint, you should come on and be his co-host for those, because I'm not sure I'm ready for Trespasser.
That would be fun. But anyway, that's half joke, half serious. But Trespasser, we'll get to it someday, audience. In some fashion. But anyway, thank you so much for being on, Clint. It was definitely a delight, and appreciate you opening up about everything and just giving us a trip down memory lane.
It was my pleasure, and believe me, the lane we are walking in is through my memories. It's fun to talk about this game, and like I said, I still enjoy playing it. So probably I'm going to have to unbox my 360 and give it a whirl sometime soon. But nice. Thanks very much, guys. I really had a great time.
Welcome back from the break. We don't do lots of breaks, but we tend to do them after the interviews. And that was a great one. I am, we will, as we were talking about while we waited for things to upload and stuff, really just imagining Clint on a surfboard now.
Someone, maybe we'll get lucky with the Photoshop job on that. And he'll be really happy that we.
Oh, I'm sure he'll be thrilled that you threw that out there. Yeah. So, yep, that was. But yeah, great conversation. He's so thoughtful about games, and yeah, and his approach to them, and like what he's trying to achieve, and kind of some of the stuff we were talking about there at the end in particular is like, no, they really knew what they were trying to do, and it was not. It was kind of funny to hear him say, no, it wasn't really that surprising. Like, I didn't expect him to say that at all. Yeah, which is really funny. Yeah, I mean, it stirred up a lot of stuff. I was thinking about a lot of, he's given some of my favorite talks of all time at GDC. He's really given great ones. I think we alluded to one about the Splinter Cell dynamics, this sort of simulation stuff. But he gave a great one where he talked at the beginning about what makes a good Go game and why this one master, this one kind of old school master resigned from a game with this younger master, because he made the game not beautiful, and like this change in styles. That's from a talk from, God,
I think I remember that one. Now.
Yeah. We were probably sitting in that one together. Yeah. I mean, he's one of those people I always enjoy going and hearing what he has to say, and, just off the cuff talking about this game for an hour, he's the same way. So it's remarkable.
Yeah, he never disappoints, and it's I'm super happy that I know he's proud of Splinter Cell as well, but clearly, especially Chaos Theory. But I'm glad we got him on for this, because he and I had never talked too deeply about Far Cry 2 specifically in the past, so I didn't know kind of his personal perspective on it, and the fact that he still plays it, and and it's sort of like its personal significance and those sorts of things. So it's kind of neat because you could hear the heart in it for him too. And how proud he is. And I think he talked about some of the difficulties of some of their choices too, and he talked about those well too. So yeah, it was good. I'm really thankful that he was able to come on.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that he was young and taking this on and optimistic at the time, because it is a game that back when I originally played it, I mean, it just captivated me for days. And I think once I wrote a blog post about how it was like one of the only actually mature games, like, games that were quote unquote mature. It was one that was actually mature, and not in the way the label means, but sort of how I think about games, and it felt very mature to me. Even with the sort of things that we would call problematic today, definitely felt like there was something behind it. And we didn't even get into, like, this was a game that people tried playing like permadeath. We talked about it with Zelda, how people would play the game their own way.
Yeah.
This is a game that inspired that as well, with sort of people going and doing like, okay, I'm going to try to stay alive as if it's my one life. As if I'm going to go fully embodied to this guy. I'm going to play on hard mode and play permadeath. We didn't talk about that either, but that was like something that this game inspired. So it's been fun revisiting it, and thinking about this compared to sort of the direction the series has gone, and it just makes me so excited I know he will not be able to take Assassin's Creed, quite to this extent, because that's an institution now. Whereas this wasn't, and it had kind of been just kind of dribbling away I had totally forgotten about like Far Cry Instincts, and there are 2 or 3 of those, I think, on the consoles, and they were ported to different, like I think there was even on the Wii, and this was just a totally different direction. So I'm very curious to see what he does, because he's a guy who takes things in different directions, I think. So.
Yeah, I haven't played. I'm not a Watchdog. It's funny. When I think back, I'm like, I realize I'm not really a Ubisoft person now, other than Splinter Cell, and I haven't even played all of those. But it
was like 8 or 9 of them.
So Watchdog, Legion. It's like I just feel like Clint's going to probably bring something interesting, even if he can't push it beyond where Ubisoft wants him to. He's probably going to bring something, and the team are going to bring something interesting to it. So it's probably, Legion is something as a concept that sounded really interesting. But I don't know if you noted, I don't think I mentioned specifically, but the particular Assassin's Creed that he's working on looks.
Yeah, I don't know anything about it.
Well, no, nobody does. But the teaser, it's codenamed Hex, and the teaser's got kind of like a Blair Witch feel to it or something. And so it's because they announced a one that is in feudal Japan, and they announced this one, and then they have the infinite thing, infinity thing, which is more of a meta thing, I think. But I think I had assumed it would have been the feudal Japan one, but he's working on the Hex one, which doesn't look like anything they've done before. So maybe it's a good sign.
Yeah, no, that is a good sign. Yeah, I mean, I've played a lot of Assassin's Creed, and I guess I'll be playing a lot more of Assassin's Creed.
That's what they want.
I got to get to that. Yeah, that's what they want. I mean, they got me. So yeah. Anyway, I probably won't play a lot more Far Cry. It is, as we talked about, kind of it does go down a lot easier these days. But Assassin's Creed is really just more my flavor of the Ubisoft game. I enjoy their settings and their characters. So to have him be part of one is exciting to me. So I look forward to that. Who knows when? 5 years from now, probably. Those games take a while. Actually, probably not that long, because they're kind of they try to go every year or every other year kind of thing. So maybe we're looking at 4 years or something. But yeah, cool. If there's sort of something witchy about it, that sounds kind of cool to me. So, all right. Anyway, Thanks so much to Clint for coming on. You can send us reviews. We actually had one. We're not going to do reviews in email this week, but we love to have them both. We'll get to those maybe next week or the week after. You can shoot us email at devgameclub@gmail.com, or you can find us on the web at devgameclub.com, or on Twitter at devgameclub. You can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
He's also streaming. Lately, he's been streaming Dark Souls continuously for months now.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of Dark Souls you've been doing, and you've gotten to Seath the Scaleless.
Yeah,
I believe
I did. I got to them. I got to them on my own off stream because I was a little confused about the crystal caves and I wanted to do a little bit of sort of grinding and stuff. So, so I'll see if I can vanquish that one.
That whole area above Anor Londo is bonkers. How much like more game there is in there.
Yeah,
and you're like, I can't. There's this huge library, and
who's the Duke? It's like the Duke's library.
Yeah, the Duke's archives.
The Duke's archives. Like, oh man, and then but one of the NPCs. Anyway, yeah, just come watch if you want to see the nonsense, or if you like Dark Souls. But I don't know. Like I keep saying, I can't imagine finishing the game on stream, but that's what I keep playing. So who knows?
All right, well, keep at it. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo and store are by Mark Garcia. If you want to find the store, there's a link in our pinned Twitter, the pinned tweet in the response, I believe, so you can get to it. It's a labor of love by Mark. We really, really appreciate it. Have fun hiding the fact that your villain is the hero from the first game this week, and good night.
Good night.
I bet you didn't know that.
No, what?
The Jackal is the main character from Far Cry 1.
I did not know that. Wild.
Yep.
That's funny that didn't come up.
He's Jack Carver, the Jackal.
It's not a play on the name. It's actually true, canonically.
Yes, Clint has actually said that. Yeah, it's a whole thing.